Alright everybody, welcome back to Top Comics Pressing. I hear the cool thing of the week to do is to share with people the top 5 comics in their collection. So I have a selection right here of 5 of my top comic books that I'm going to share with you. But before I reveal what my top 5 are, I think it's worth taking a minute just to reflect on how different people collect comics and kind of what motivates me as a collector. So if you've been around comics, you know, some people collect to be, let's say, a completist collector where they want every appearance of a certain character, or they want a full run to make sure that they have every element of the story from beginning to end. A great way to collect, I have no objection there. Other people are key collectors where they're looking for those first appearances, those epic keys or grails. Other people might be looking for only the highest grade books possible. Those CGC 10.0s, CGC 9.9s, maybe if they have to slum down to a CGC 9.8 or forbid a CGC 9.6. You know, they're really motivated by having the mintiest mint of all mint copies of a comic book. Nothing wrong with that, I understand that. Other people might be motivated by character development or the interior art or maybe just the cover. Other people might be motivated by a really good story or, you know, something that touches them or bridges a couple of genres. You know, comics are a very broad genre, from sci-fi to superheroes. We've got at least what used to be westerns were quite popular. You know, if you go back to the 60s, or Looney Tunes, Disney, all kinds of TV shows represented. Video game comic books. You've got, you know, old pre-code horror that are like quite graphic at times. And so there's just really a broad array. And so just thinking about if you're after top fair market value, if you're looking to maybe speculate on books, where you want to, you know, buy books cheap and then sell them after they get popular. You know, that's one way to collect. That's not what does it for me. So I am really kind of most motivated by the characters, the character development, the stories, the conflict between characters, and, you know, being able to see or relate to the individuals or empathize with the situations they find themselves in. And so, you know, when thinking about all of that and thinking about, you know, why these books are the special ones to me, I just think it's worth communicating that they're not the highest grade books in my collection. They're not even the most, well, all right, there's a couple of really, really nice ones in here, so I won't say that. All right, so without further ado, what I'm going to do here is jump into my number 5 book. And so the number 5 book I have selected is The Amazing Spider-Man Annual number 21. So for those of you that don't know, this is the original marriage here of Peter Parker and Mary Jane. And I have this one selected because after my wife and I got engaged, I bought a copy of this. And this is the issue that has been continuously displayed somewhere in our household across, I think, 4 if not 5 locations since we got married in 2010. And so this one's been going strong in the Topcheski household for quite some time. And it's one that I think always makes us smile or giggle. And of course, I selected it for the novelty of that it was the wedding issue. Now, I think that this is the first like really significant comic book wedding. It was really promoted at the time. And for those of you that don't know, there's another important piece of comic book history associated with it, and that it is, as far as I know, the first version of a Marvel variant cover. So if you look carefully, Mary Jane is the same on both, but Peter Parker is on the left copy and Spider-Man is on the right copy. And you'll notice behind them, you know, on the left copy, you have all of the people that were important to Mary Jane and Peter Parker's life. And on the right copy, you see all of the heroes and villains that both support and plague Spider-Man. And so love them or hate them, I think variant covers are here to stay. And being the first Marvel variant cover adds a little bit of significance to this one, although admittedly it's not why it's on my top 5. It's in my top 5 because you know, I bought it after my wife and I got engaged, and we've been holding on to a copy of this ever since. And so there you go. If you didn't know that, a little bit of Marvel history. By the way, the first DC variant cover I think predates this, which is the John Byrne Man of Steel cover. There are two of those from pretty close to the same era. And that, I believe, is the first variant cover that's, you know, often noted as a modern, we want to sell you two copies of the same book kind of variant cover. But these are the first for the Marvel era. So that was pretty cool. All right, moving on to my number 4 book here is a Star Wars Heir to the Empire #1. And I had Tim Zahn sign this in front of me. He was polite enough to sign it. The Force is strong. And at least to me, I even have my ratty tatty beaten up, very clearly overly read Heir to the Empire novel that kind of predated the comic books. And so this thing was read and reread, and this one's important, I think, not just because it's the first Grand Admiral Thrawn, who's obviously a very popular character, and it's the first Mara Jade, who's obviously a very popular character in the Star Wars Expanded Universe, but I think both this comic book and the novel here encapsulate a special era in the Star Wars universe where there were a lot of different authors all publishing novels in what we now call the Expanded Universe, all in that kind of early 2000s-ish, or sorry, early 90s era. And, you know, a lot of those books I think are worth revisiting. So there's I, Jedi, there's the Rogue Squadron series, there's Heir to the Empire, and it's you know, full trilogy. And I think that was just a great era for Star Wars, and as somebody who grew up with Star Wars in the early 80s and then lived through kind of the desert of the late 80s, it was really awesome to be able to see not just the novels and the comic books, but there were video games that reemerged, and I think it was really that enthusiasm and that appetite for people who, you know, may have had the original Star Wars as little kids and were finally beginning to emerge into adolescence, or perhaps it was people who saw Star Wars as adolescents that were now adults rewatching things with their kids. I think it was really that spark that really helped fuel, you know, the prequels, and then obviously the Star Wars universe, which has just exploded and continued to expand exponentially. You know, now we've had an Obi-Wan show. Mandalorian is awesome. We're waiting for a Ahsoka show to show up. You know, they're talking about doing yet more Star Wars movies. And so really, I think all of that beyond the first 3 movies started in this early 90s era of Star Wars. Yeah, so I'm a huge fan of it. And this one I think is a really important capstone to that era of Star Wars, and so I've selected it for that reason. All right, flipping to my number 3 book here, will give you a view also into the 90s kid. You're going to sense a trend here, but all of these might have something to do with being a kid in the 90s. And my number 3 book in my PC is a copy of the Batman Adventures #3, signed by Mark Hamill. And Mark Hamill signed this "Jokingly Yours." Now, I unfortunately did not witness Mark Hamill signing this. I have not had the opportunity to meet Mark Hamill. And there is a second really sad element to this. I had this book on my queue to have Kevin Conroy sign at 3 separate cons, and for various reasons, whether it was COVID or my professional career, or, you know, the original illness from Kevin Conroy, which I later found out was, you know, after he passed away, it was about that same time. I missed Kevin Conroy being able to sign this at 3 conventions in a row. Maybe it was 4, but I really, really had wanted Kevin Conroy to sign down here to complete the duo on this book. That being said, I don't know if it's because I was never able to get Kevin Conroy to sign it, or if it was because maybe now it means more to me after how much I thought about how much I really wanted Kevin Conroy to sign it. But this book happens to be a really important one to me. Not only am I a Batman fan, as I think are a lot of comic book enthusiasts, but the Batman the Animated Series, to me, you know, that whole universe, the whole Rogues Gallery that Bruce Timm and Paul Dini put together, you know, both the introduction of Harley Quinn, but also Mr. Freeze's backstory, just, you know, the epic creation of Two-Face in that series, the combination of Batman both being a detective, a crime fighter, sulking a little bit, but also being supported by the Bat Family, although it wasn't like the whole Bat Family all the time and nothing but the Bat Family. Alfred at some time has some serious sass in the series, but at the same time is always there to support Bruce. There's just so much to love about Batman the Animated Series, from the musical scores to that lightning strike in the initial credits to... I just love it. So, and I think it stands up well. So if you're new to comic book collecting, or if you don't remember the Batman the Animated Series, I encourage you to go back and rewatch it. It's actually pretty entertaining even as an adult, and it stands up way better than a lot of the other animated cartoons that were prevalent in the 80s and the 90s. This one I think is great, and part of the reason it's so great is because of the voice acting of Kevin Conroy and Mark Hamill. And just that Joker laugh is so epic. And I love so much of it, and including just from, where Christmas with the Joker, which is the first part where he takes off singing Jingle Bells, Batman Smells, and he's literally getting away on a flying Christmas tree. Like, it's just amazing. All right, that's my book number 3. Moving on to book number 4. Advancing to book number 2, I said that backwards there, is XMen Number 1. I happen to have an XMen Number 1 in my collection, and this, of course, is the Jim Lee 1991 reintroduction of the X-Men characters. Now, as a kid of the early 90s, not only did I grow up with the X-Men on TV, they had video games, right? There was the standalone Nintendo game, there was a standalone Wolverine game, there was a Super Nintendo X-Men game. The cartoon was awesome, and what I love the most about this issue is the toys. So the Toy Biz toys were just massive. Now, when I said X-Men Number 1, this is an X-Men Number 1, and this image was for sure, in a way, not only the costumes and the characters that just covered everything as a kid. From Pizza Hut, oh my gosh, we went to Pizza Hut to go get the little X-Men comic books. Well, so that X-Men Number 1 led me to eventually buy a real copy of X-Men Number 1. Now, the truth is, I bought this comic book in 2003, just before I graduated high school. At the time, I paid $500 for it. It was raw. It was not a CGC book. And my mom thought I was absolutely bonkers for spending this much money on a comic book, because I bought this for $500. I'll remember that forever. And I remember partially because at the time I was making minimum wage, and so this thing represented like well over 80 hours worth of work, right? So I was saving, and I wasn't working full time, right? I was in high school, so I was probably working, 15 to 20 hours a week tops, probably less than that. And so this thing represented months of work and savings. And, I tried to do my best to make sure I got a copy that I thought was both affordable and nice. And the truth is, it came water damaged. That was like the one question I didn't ask the seller, right? I asked about, is it complete? Does it have restoration? Does it have, pencil on the interior? Is there ink? Is there cutouts missing? I didn't ask about water damage. And it turns out this whole thing here, the whole bottom back corner was solidly water damaged. And I almost sent this to CGC in, maybe 2005, 2007, sometime after I bought it. But the fees to do so were just really prohibitive as somebody who is an enthusiastic kid, and I was, balancing saving for college or gas money versus CGC fees. So this thing sat raw in my collection until last year. So if you look up the CGC serial number, it was, relatively recently created. And, pressing wasn't a thing, cleaning wasn't a thing back in like 2003 or 2004, when CGC was first coming to its own. So it turns out I was way too nervous to actually send this to somebody else to work on, right? This was like my big baby. I had spent a lot of time, and this thing, while it was not continuously displayed in my household, like the Amazing SpiderMan Annual, it had been sitting in my parents' basement. I knew exactly where it was, and it was up on the top shelf in the basement, carefully protected, and eventually over COVID, when comic books really started to escalate in value, I decided finally I needed to get this thing slabbed. In the meantime, because I was so nervous to send this to somebody else to clean and press, I actually had taught myself how to clean and press, partially because I wanted to eventually get this thing slabbed. And so this book not only represents a snapshot of high school me, being bold enough to buy this book back in 2003, but it also is a huge part of the motivation for why I ended up, starting to teach myself how to clean and press several years ago. And so that obviously has turned into a little bit more than a hobby, but it's something that has been a lot of fun. And so thank you for those of you who watch me clean and press comic books. By the way, if you want a link to the before and after pictures for this, they're still on my Flickr, so I can forward them to people who are curious. Maybe I'll drop that in the description down below. But not only is this thing epic, I got hooked on X-Men from the Jim Lee era of X-Men, and I couldn't be happier now with the first appearance of Magneto, who's one of my all-time favorite comic book. I don't want to call him a villain. I'm going to call him a character. So that's how I view it. Okay, now for my top book, I have something special here. And this one is a very important first appearance. It's also a very rare book to actually find. I have a copy of Albedo II from Thoughts and Images, 1984. And so this book is probably one of the most important comics from the, non-major labels of the 80s. I think to most collectors, this thing might be second only to Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles #1 first print. Albedo II is a pretty rare book, and it turns out I am a big fan of Usagi Yojimbo. So this is the first appearance of Usagi Yojimbo, the samurai rabbit. This is the kickoff here to what will be now close to a 40-year career of Stan Sakai, being the sole creator and artist of Usagi Yojimbo. It's a character that, to be honest, I didn't pay a lot of attention to throughout my childhood or my adolescence. I was introduced to this character originally through the Ninja Turtles cartoon, to be honest, because, I've already confessed to it. I was a kid of the 90s, and, oh gosh, we crushed all the Ninja Turtles. So we totally had an Usagi Yojimbo action figure as a kid. But I really came to appreciate this a little bit more in the last, we'll say, five years or so. And my brother really encouraged me to check out Usagi in a lot more detail. It turns out I actually really enjoyed particularly the first 3 to 5 years of this character when I went back to find reprints of the issues. You can actually get the original reprint of Albedo II is in the Usagi Yojimbo Summer Special, which is a much more common and much more affordable book published originally through Fantagraphics. But I just thought it was incredibly well done. The character was likable, the panels are well laid out, the story is coherent, and the combination of sound effects and the word bubbles and the images tells a complete and comprehensive story, and it's one that I think is relatable. Now, over the intervening 40-ish years, it hasn't been 40 years yet, but we're coming up on it, so this is 1984, so we're getting close. Stan Sakai has continued to tell the story for Usagi Yojimbo. He's introduced a number of notable characters. We've had a couple of different universes for Space Usagi, and the Senzo, which is the new TMT Ninja Turtles crossover. But all in all, the original character with the original wandering Ronin character, who both is up to continuous mischief, but it's always well-intentioned mischief. He ends up sometimes, I think, in situations beyond his control and manages to go with it. At times, it is a little redundant, and perhaps not every issue over those 40 years is fully original, but on average, there are laughable moments that are laugh out loud funny. There are weird or interesting character dynamics that I think make you really appreciate the universe and the characters that have been set up. I would say the storytelling is always fantastic, and it is not always a very intense read, but it's always a very enjoyable read. And so I would put Usagi Yojimbo on the top of my list for all the reasons I laid out at the start of this video. And I'm a big Usagi fan. Now, this one didn't just fall in my lap. I ended up having to ask my wife for a favor to be able to buy this one, and she wrote me this really awesome what I'll call permission slip. I'm not gonna read it out loud, but it's a nice long letter that I found on the kitchen table one day, basically her okay for me to finally buy an Albedo II. And it came at what I really think is a pivotal moment in our life, particularly because I did not buy this until really COVID had set in. So it was in the slump before comics got super hot, before collectibles really took off. But it was one that was on my radar before then, and I was keeping my eye out for one, and this one ended up floating in my lap. It's not the highest grade copy. I got it pre-slabbed. I have no intention of taking it out to crack it and press it. But it's one that is special to me, not only because it's the first appearance of what has become one of my favorite comic book characters, but also because my wife was really generous enough and awesome enough to let me buy it at a time when we probably should not have. But she had faith in us and in me, and she let me get some book. And several years later, it's not something I don't think either of us would regret. So that is my top 5 there. We've got a first variant cover for the Amazing Spider-Man. We've got, I think we're a really important contribution to a universe or a galaxy far, far away, and one that I think resonates with me personally. We have what is shockingly but sadly the only DC book in this list is the Mark Hamill Joker for the animated series fans. And then we have X-Men Number 1. Yeah. Alright, this one's the cooler X-Men Number 1, but I want to say this one's pretty awesome too. Alright, and then of course we have our top dog of the night here, Albedo number 2. Alright, so those are my top 5. There are higher grade books in my collection. This is the only 9/8 that's out here, and this is not a very high 9/8 to find for the most heavily printed comic book of all time. But I think this gives you a snapshot into how I think about collecting, and yeah, that's all I gotta say for it. So collect for you, don't collect for other people. Go find a comic book that speaks to you. Find characters that you can relate to. Find art that you think is awesome, and make sure you're treating yourself to the mode of collecting, whether you're a completist collector who's looking for everything, or whether you're that key collector or that spec collector, or you just do it for fun. So that is all up to you. So thanks for watching. Please go ahead and don't forget to thumbs up the video and click that subscribe button right down below.